Good morning, colleagues. My name is Zotsile Ndlovu, and I'm also from Mapping Services. As Mrs. Tshabsile Rambau here said, today we will be looking at the history of the mapping in SA, starting from the 1650s up to the late 1980s. Specifically, how was the process of mapping performed back then? And how long did the entire process take, starting from the data collection, map compilation, and all the way up to the map reproduction or map printing? On our introduction, there we have the definition of the National Mapping Organization. Every country has a national mapping organization which plays the role of providing them with the current and the reliable geospatial information of the country. Here in South Africa, we have the Chief Directorate National Geospatial Information, in short form, CDNGI. CDNGI is the NMO that is responsible for the establishment of the integrated survey, the provision of the national mapping series, and aerial imagery. However, there are other national organization mapping agencies that also deals with cadastral matters. On our next slides, we have the history of mapping. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company established a base at the Cape of Good Hope, and settlers were allocated lands to farm. However, these lands were allocated to them without being surveyed, even though there were title deeds accompanying the diagram showing the boundary areas. The disposal of lands was solely based on the land registry system adopted from Netherlands. And the Netherlands registry system stated that within 5 days of arrival, then the settlers will receive the citizen service number. On these slides, we have the picture of the map drawn from the 1650s, illustrating how the unsurveyed Dutch farms and boundaries were hedged as the Cape of Good Hope. Years later, in 1904, the need for national mapping program was discussed. And then in 1910, the Union of SA was created from the four colonies. And the new dominion was embroiled in the First World War, when only military maps received a priority. The British War Office undertook mapping of Orange River Colony at a scale of 1:125,000. And this map of Orange River was surveyed by the Royal Engineers using the plan table. And there we have the picture of the Orange River Colony. On our next slides, we have the examples of the plan table, which are the surveying equipment that was used to map the Orange River Colony. And you can see there we have two plan tables. What is a plan table? There are many terms used to describe the plan table, and two of them are as follows. The first one describes the plan table as a type of a surveying equipment where the plotting of the plan and the field observation can be done simultaneously. And we have the second one, which described it as a type of surveying instrument consisting essentially of a drawing board, the drawing tool on a tripod with a ruler or an alidade pointed at an object observed and used for plotting the lines of survey directly from the observation. As it can be seen on this zoomed in picture from the slides number 7, the instrument on top of the tripod that looks like a telescope where is looking at or sighting, it's called an alidade for sighting or for observing the object while enabling lines of survey to be plotted directly from observation using the drawing board and the drawing tool that are also set up on top of the tripod stand and the plan table. About 10 years later, I'm sorry about that. And we also have the enlarged picture of the plan table that was displayed in slide number 7. And about 10 years later, in 1921, Dr. Willem Cornelis van der Steur was appointed. He then formed the Survey Commission and its recommendation regarding mapping. On my bottom right corner there, we have sorry about that again. On the bottom there, we have a picture of Van der Steur, who was born in Netherlands. Dr. Van der Steur went further regarding geodetic and cadastral requirements of the country, which resulted in the passing of the Land Survey Act number 9 of 1927, which aimed at regulating the surveying of lands in the Republic and to provide for matters connected therewith. This gave the authority to proceed with the mapping, but a good geodetic survey and precise level network were addressed first before mapping began, which resulted on having a 2-degree gas conformal projection of coordinates. Then in 1928, Dr. Van der Steur used a surveying equipment called Veld phototheodolite, borrowed from the Royal Geographical Society to test if the terrestrial method of photogrammetric surveying could meet the South African mapping requirement. On my bottom right corner there, we have a photo of a Veld phototheodolite. The terrestrial photogrammetric method of surveying was then tested on an area of its 159 square kilometer in the Southern Cape Peninsula, where 10 camera stations were selected to command the area, at which 20 bases were measured and 12 trig stations were used for fixing the base station in position and elevation. From them, about 100 control points were fixed and 40 pairs of photographic plates were exposed and developed. After the computations were done, the data and photographic plates were submitted to Switzerland for plotting on a special Veld orthographic machine, which took about a year. The orthographic machines here in South Africa are what we call the stereoplotters. On our next slide, we have the example of one of the photogrammetric stereoplotters. We have a Veld orthographic machine, A2, and then on our next slides again, we have the second example of the photogrammetric stereoplotter, which is called the Veld orthographic machine A8. And now my colleague Zamambo Mkhize is going to take over.
Greetings, colleagues. My name is Zamambo Mkhize, also from the Mapping Services Directorate. So I will continue from here, starting from the year 1934. So in 1934, a central mapping office was established as a separate entity at the Office of the Surveyor General of the Transvaal to expedite the national mapping project. In 1936, the office was incorporated into the Trigonometrical Survey Office and became the extension of the cartographic branch. Then, in the year 1936, it was also a turning point in history of the 1:50,000 topographical map series to cover the whole country. The Minister of Lands appointed an interdepartmental committee to assist the director of the Trigonometrical Survey Office in drawing up a detailed mapping program, and development of aerial photography was achieved. Then, following that, the South African Air Force collaborated with trigonometrical personnel to supply thousands of aerial photographs. Following that, a 15-year plan commenced using aerial photography, plane table methods, and a variety of photographic interpretation techniques. The photogrammetric equipment was introduced during the year 1948 at the Trig Survey Office, and they were useful to produce accurate large-scale maps, large-scale plans. Then, in the year 1948, the first photogrammetric stereo plotters were commissioned, and the capture of topographical data from aerial photography commenced. In the image, we have an example of a photogrammetric stereo plotters that were used in the year 1948. Stereo plotters were devices used in photogrammetry, a technique for obtaining accurate measurements and mapping from aerial photographs. Stereo plotters had a table and a pantograph arm for the creation of pencil traces, also called manuscripts. Okay. Following that, in the year 1954, field revision of Cape Town and Worcester sheets was completed. The Cape Town sheet was surveyed and drawn in 1954, printed in 1955, and the Worcester sheet was surveyed in 1954, drawn in 1955, and printed in 1956. The image that we have here on the screen is the image shows the third edition sheet 3318 of Cape Town, which was surveyed and drawn in 1954 and printed in 1955 at a scale of 1:250,000. Then, in year 1962, then a new 15-year plan was introduced, which coincided with new developments in the air survey industry, such as super wide-angle photography and electronic computers. In 1965, the geodetic network was extended into the Northern Cape province to provide trigonometrical control for mapping at a scale of 1:250,000. Then, in 1966, the introduction of scribing for fair drawing was introduced, and then with that, the pace for cartographic work increased in 1967. The image is there. It shows the light table. The light table which is used to see detail as one during map production or construction of any map. To see the details as one is scribing using the scribing tools. With the scribing tools are the sapphire nibs that you see there, and also the next picture, that one also with the tools that were used on that table. For more in-depth knowledge on how this whole process works, you are more than welcome to walk into Medium Scale for more info. Okay. The manual production of maps required perfection, experience, and a lot of patience. So it was time and cost ineffective, and massive production was not possible. So South Africa adopted the metric system in 1970, and all maps compiled prior to 1970 had to be metricated. Then in 1972, the Trigonometrical Survey Office became part of a wider organization, and together with the offices of the Surveyor General was placed under the umbrella of the Director General of Surveys. The complete coverage of South Africa mapped at a scale of 1:50,000 was then achieved in 1976. First, under the Department of Lands and subsequently part of the Department of Agricultural Credit and Land Tenure, then the organization was transferred to the Department of Community Development in 1980. In June 1980, it became the Chief Directorate of Surveys and Mapping, which we now know as the Chief Directorate National Geospatial Information, CDNGI, our office. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, colleagues. Our presentation ends here. And before I hand it over to you, Nozipho, I would just like to say thank you to all the team members that contributed towards gathering this information. If I may acknowledge them, is Rian Swad, Wali, Matthew, Zama, Zotile, and Imelda. Thank you so much. We're handing over to you, Nozipho.
Yeah, thank you, Tabi. Thank you, Zama. Thank you, Zotile, and to the rest of the mapping services team that contributed to such an informative presentation. Yeah, I see some hands clapping there. We've learned a lot with the students, some of the students here, and they really appreciated this information. So we did record this part of the presentation from mapping services. So the presentation will still be available even to staff members who are unable to attend today, because yeah, it's a very, it's a lot of history that is very rich for us. So colleagues, I will then just open up this session for any questions, remarks, anything that you would like to say, either to both sets of presenters or to mapping services directly. But I think because this was largely for the research and writing initiative on the past, especially for NGI, I would say would take the questions that directly are speaking to the mapping services presentation. So we'll just have some of these minutes just to take those questions or comments. So you can just raise your hand and then I will just ask you to unmute. I'm not seeing any hands as yet. So if there's no hands, I will assume that there's no questions. Okay, Mr. Parker, I see your hand. Mr. Parker, you can unmute. And then Mark, I also see your hand.
I just want to thank both teams that were presenting for really fascinating and really informative and presentations. I want to comment that it was presented extremely well. I'm really impressed with the posture and the tone of presentation. But besides that, the detail that came through, I learned a lot of stuff. In fact, like I learned now about that map of 1801, which was, so there's a lot of things that I learned, and I think it was really valuable that staff saw the history of where the maps came from, so that they can also appreciate the extremely proud history that we have in terms of mapping South Africa. Yeah, so well done to both teams. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Mark, you can unmute as well.
Hi there, everybody. Yeah, that was a very well presented presentation. I also learned a lot, Mr. Parker. Even though I've been here a long time, there's things I didn't know, and glad to pick them up. You always learn, even though I've been here such a long time, you keep on learning and you learn all the time. Yeah. So well done, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for those comments. And yeah, like I said, there's a lot of hands clapping. So I think it's a unanimous feeling that, we just appreciate the initiative. Mr. Parker, I think your hand is still up, or is this a new hand?
Yeah, it's a new hand. I just like to comment that, it's so important to know how things were made in the past. I want to use an example of the maps that were produced manually. We also need to understand the mode that maps were made, so that I can understand the error sources that are involved. Very often we superimpose data from various vintages over each other, and